Happy weekend to you. Your man is here in Indianapolis calling the Midwest Boxing Showcase, uh, headlined by Robert Merriweather, having his comeback fight after losing on Zuffa. You guys check that out tonight on the Porterweight podcast. I'll be commentating ringside along with Sean Porter. But we got some news to get to. We're a few days late because of all the traveling and everything, and that is another glove triangle. This time, not between Devin Haney, Keyshawn Davis, and Shakur Stevenson, but between Jai Opetaia, David Benavidez, and Noel Mikaelian. And what has happened is, originally, Noel Mikaelian and Jai Opetaia had a photo op at the inaugural Zuffa event, which was going to be billed as a WBC IBF unification. Jai Opetaia winds up fighting Brandon Glanton. He eventually gets stripped of the IBF title because of the IBF's ruling that they cannot go through with a bout with Zuffa advertising and promoting it as a world championship bout for their inaugural Zuffa title, which was in a legal gray area, let's say, because they're technically not supposed to be able under current legislation to have their own title. They could, but they would argue they could promote it as a trophy and not an officially sanctioned world title. The gray area was there. The IBF winds up stripping Opetaia, unfortunately for Opetaia, and I think unfairly for Opetaia, but they do that, and their title is then vacant. So then it's rumored for months that Opetaia and Mikaelian are going to have a fight, two of the top 3 or 4 cruiserweights in the world, Opetaia being number one, Mikaelian the WBC champ. But then after Benavidez knocks out Zittel Ramirez to grab the WBA and WBO championships, a few months after, which was reported and I reported on, Benavidez' father petitions to the WBC to make his son the mandatory, which he successfully gets. So tries to intercept that fight from Jai Opetaia. Now it's coming out that Jai Opetaia will wind up fighting Noel Mikaelian. Mikaelian is very much so at risk of being stripped of his WBC title, but that this fight will be the co-main event to Ryan Garcia and Conor Benn. And Anthony Gurgis, I may have his last name pronounced wrong, but he is talking about how this is in violation of the Ali Act. It's funny, we had people tagging me, eventually even tagging you, calling us, where are the Ali Act activists now? Which again is a bit of projection and irony, because activism is trying to enact political change, and we're the ones saying, leave it the fuck alone, for so many reasons on my end, talking about, I don't even want to get into it again, but briefly, the Ellisons' control of the media, backing Paramount and Ari Emanuel, Saudi owning 60% of the company, and these forces that have economic ties to Israel and Saudi and the Gulf countries should not be influencing legislative change in the United States government, as they're also facing roadblocks to consolidating American media ownership as well. That aside, they are the activists, actually. They are the ones promoting political change. And that, to the actual definition, if you look it up on Google right now, is activism. So they are actually the Ali Act activists. We are, as you joked with me on the phone the other day, technically the establishment, although you have pointed out several times the Ali Act does need to be changed in some ways, and I wouldn't disagree with that. I just think the means of which it's being promoted and being strong-armed through the political process is kind of a deeper issue than boxing and shouldn't be taken that way. But Anthony G is right. His fighter should not be stripped of the WBC title to fight Jai Opetaia. And if anything, this fight should also be for the vacant IBF title that Jai Opetaia was wrongly stripped of. So this should really, in my mind, be a WBC IBF World Championship fight. And funny enough, about the IBF, today as we speak, Aaron McKenna and Edinosa Olia are fighting for the IBF title, and Zuffa's promoting that as a World Championship fight. And Jai Opetaia, his team and legal team, are suing the IBF on behalf of violating the Ali Act. So there's a level of irony here that both of these fighters are using the Ali Act to enforce what the wrongdoings are, and ultimately Mikaelian is getting what he wishes for. Now he may be stripped of his title, which again I definitely don't agree with, but he's landing the bigger fight. He's landing the bigger money fight because through Zuffa, and Anthony G is saying that Don King buried this offer. He never presented it to his fighter, and instead there's been a long delay in getting an actual offer across the table for the Benavidez fight, which has been mandated. I asked Mauricio Suleiman last week, I said, why are you doing this when sanctioning bodies never mandate the champion of other sanctioning organizations to be the mandatory for their own title? He's like, I don't know what you mean. I said, well, David's the WBA, WBO champion. Why are you mandating him for the WBC title? And he says, well, this was his loophole. David is the WBC champion at 175 pounds. So, as is always the rules, the champion of a lower weight class can petition to become the mandatory of the division above. We just saw this with Keyshawn being a mandatory at 140, then being, or number one at 140, being enforced as a mandatory at 147. So that is kind of his out clause. But I'll just say, I think Mauricio's doing David no favors with this. The way you get what would be good for boxing and would be good for Benavidez and Opetaia and everybody involved is to let Benavidez go ahead and fight for the interim title against the Polish interim champion, Michael Sisolak. Probably not pronouncing his name right either. Let Benavidez fight for the interim title. Let Mikaelian defend his WBC title. And eventually mandate Benavidez as the interim champion for the winner of Mikaelian-Opetaia, which is going to be Opetaia. And that's how you get undisputed for all four belts. But, of course, it won't work this way. But Mauricio has to be careful, Raheem, because just like the IBF's being slapped with a lawsuit, he could be slapped with a lawsuit because he has no legal precedence here that may not hold up in court, because you let David be the interim champion for Canelo Alvarez for 2+ years or so, never mandated that fight. Mikaelian just won the title in December. He's still well underneath the 12-month window that he must be mandated to face a fighter, and Jamal Charlo had multiple years without having to defend his WBC belt before he eventually got stripped. And here you are, you're about to strip the Mikaelian. That might get dicey if someone really pushes the issue with him on that. And then another thing, I find it odd that Anthony G wouldn't know about this offer from Zuffa when I knew about it and reported on it as such May 30th. I said, it was told as a quote to me, Mikaelian will have a big boy decision to make. Does he want to fight Benavidez and keep his title for less money? Or does he want to make more money and do the Zuffa fight with Jai Opetaia? And obviously prize fighters are going to go for more money. And again, he shouldn't be stripped of that said WBC title. But if I knew about that offer in May and reported on it in May, how could he not have known about it? So,
well, okay, it's a lot right at the outset, right? So let's take some bite-sized chunks, and you'll have to be patient as we go through this, because I might have to ask you to repeat some bits of it just so that we're clear. Like, yeah, we who follow this thing day to day, tweet to tweet, or post to post, might be able to understand all the minutia that you just ran through.
Oh, one more. Another irony is all the
hold on, Sean. Let me get something out.
Does not
hold on. I get it, Sean. Let me work a little bit. There, we got a lot of show left. Hold on. Okay. At the outset, you say the show's a little late. Well, the truth is it's not late, because nothing's actually happened yet. These stories are unfolding. And one thing that I think we should all guard against is the need to immediately jump out with these polarizing positions as pundits. Yes, the story came out since Wednesday, Thursday. It's unfolded a little bit. We got things on our plate, and today's the day we got around to it. I was a little surprised that there's this incredible sense of urgency. Well, what's that about? What's the sense of urgency around? The sense of urgency is around framing the issue. It's around who gets their say in first to make the impression on the boxing community, on the audience, the fans, if you will, get their narrative out and cement it. and then you want to attack people who haven't jumped out front and jumped out first, as though they have nothing to say, or as though they're late with something to say. Well, maybe think some things through. Maybe let some things unfold. Let the people who are actually involved make some statements and play their hand, and then we see what the table actually looks like. Unless your intention is to control the narrative. The boxing press, and now kind of like these freelance pundits, all of which have their own voice and audience and put their statements and opinions out the same or in their own way, which is a good thing, really shouldn't be falling into the trap of becoming loyalists to one idea or another, to becoming in one camp or another. I'm not an activist. I'm not a nationalist. I'm not a loyalist. I'm a realist. I'm just talking about shit the way I see it for real. And that seems to somehow be a novel position these days. I'm looking at a landscape where, if we're going to go back to this IBF and Opetaia signing with Zuffa, fighting for the IBF in his mind, then being stripped of it, and whose fault that is, and who deserves blame for him not having an opportunity to pursue his great dream of becoming undisputed. Well, all of these things are political maneuvers. I do agree that I do believe that Jai Opetaia is and should be the IBF champion. He didn't lose that belt in the ring. He was stripped of that belt due to politics on both sides of that political equation. Everybody's being too cute by half. Everybody's trying to have 1 foot in and 1 foot out. When Zuffa comes into the game and flatly states a declaration of war on the sanctioning bodies, and then expects the sanctioning bodies to play ball, well, that's a tall order to ask. The sanctioning bodies get defensive. They've got issues that we are all aware of, that we talked about long before Zuffa came onto the scene, and they're vulnerable to criticism. The difference was, before, there was no alternative. So you can criticize them, but they had enough power, leverage, and were the only game in town, so we kind of had to just deal with what it was. And we all were conditioned to allow these sanctioning bodies to occasionally have their shenanigans, their Canelo shenanigans, their mandatory challenger out of nowhere shenanigans, to make us wait for big fights, to allow promoters to go behind the scenes in the back rooms and at the conventions and pay who they needed to pay, or grease who they needed to grease, to get their fighters into position. All of that is absolute corruption. All of that is part of what made the whole sanctioning body 4-belt process open to full view criticism and kind of ham-fisted acts of papering their own pockets in a corrupt process. And sometimes they follow their rules, and sometimes they don't. And so now, one thing I think is good, in the sense that Zuffa has brought this challenge to the front, we're all taking a lot closer look at how the sanctioning bodies are behaving, and everything that they do that seems out of order or against their own rules is highlighted. And those who are going to be campaigning and mouthpieces for Zuffa are going to point out everything in that sense that's happening. But you know what? So am I. Because as it was annoying before and we had no recourse and that really wasn't a part of the conversation, the fact that it is now is a good thing. And the same kind of hypocrisy, the same kind of doublespeak, the same kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out that Zuffa is putting forward is equally annoying and equally disingenuous. So those of us who have these microphones, those of us who have been in the game for ages, and for some reason have now decided that we're on one team or the other, or we're on one side of this fight or the other, have fallen into a trap. Like, boxing's always been political, but let's not let it become political parties. Let's not become political pundits. Let's be real. Like, the one tradition in boxing that we've had in the media is the eloquent boxing writer, the boxing pundit who could spin the yarn and really speak eloquently about the sport and how it can be a microcosm for the rest of the world and speak in like Ernest Hemingway level of articulation around what this sport really means to culture and community, poor, middle class, rich, and from every corner of the world. That's our charge, not to defend Zuffa or to defend the sanctioning bodies or to beat WBC loyalists or to be Jai Opetaia fanboys. It's to look at the situation for what it really is. What it really is a load of shit from both sides. The sanctioning bodies now are not following their own rules because they have a challenge that is in front of them that they have to overcome, which is becoming obsolete in the face of this Zuffa movement. So they want to make the bigger fights. They want to get that 3% off a bigger show. They don't want to be criticized for having mandatories that aren't going to make big fights for the networks, that aren't going to make the promoters happy, that aren't going to make the fans excited. So they're sidestepping a lot of their traditional and rules in their own platforms to make these things happen in our faces so that we don't criticize them for that, so that their promoters and networks are happy with the fights that they're getting and the fans are excited about the fights that are coming up. And what's Zuffa doing? They're putting on world championship fights and saying it's for a world title. Well, the fight that's on tonight in Dublin, I hear Max Kellerman say the world championship is on the line. What world championship? What title? What champion? Of what? Why can't you just say what it is? Who's this for? Who are you trying to fool? I'll let you jump back in, but let me say, man, Paulie Malignaggi, one of my favorites. I mean, this guy makes me laugh. He'll upset you if he says the thing that you don't like, but one thing, he's a realist. He'll say it at least as real as he feels it in the moment. And one of the funniest things he's said for ages is that UFC fans are dumb. And he goes on these rants about how dumb UFC fans are. I don't know that to be true. I'm not calling UFC fans dumb, but they are clannish because the UFC is like the only game in town. So MMA is synonymous with UFC. And when there was a UFC boxing kind of beef about who was the real fighters and who would win, UFC versus or MMA versus boxing, and if you put an MMA guy in a boxing ring, of course he loses, but at the same time, boxers aren't real fighters. If you put them in a cage, then they lose, and that's kind of the little avenue that Jake Paul walked, where he was trolling both sides, right? And it's because they felt defensive about their community in MMA. They felt like they were the new game in town, and they needed to be proving constantly that they were deserving of all this attention and fan fare that they were getting, and pay-per-view numbers, and they're coming in and they're the real combat sport, and boxing is dead and boxing is dying and it's your grandfather's sport. And so it got clannish. That's where the arguments always lie. And then I'm on Joe Rogan, and I'm almost done here. I'm on Joe Rogan, and he says to me in the interview, if you're in the street, who's winning? Like, who's winning a street fight? Like a boxer or a mixed martial artist? And at the time, that is the argument of the day. Well, a mixed martial artist. And if it's me, I'm grabbing anything in my arm's range. If it's a brick, if it's a bottle, I am sweeping the leg. I am not in the streets trying to win on points on a scorecard. I'm trying to get this fight done as soon as possible. I immediately said mixed martial artist. But the question was really like kind of a gotcha question. Are you, and me, what Joe's really asking, are you about to be honest on this show, or are you clannish? Are you one of these boxing guys that comes on here delusional about what boxing is, what it's capable of doing, and because you're in the boxing community, you have to lie about what's more effective in the street? Right. Well, that's never been me. And while Joe and I were already friends, I think at that point in the interview, which was fairly early, I got some respect out of the interviewer because we shared a little smile, both knowing that, okay, for the rest of this conversation, We're going to talk real shit. We're going to tell the truth. This isn't about our respective clans. On the same interview, I said that Tyson Fury and Ngannou was the stupidest fight I've ever heard of because Tyson Fury would walk through Ngannou within a matter of seconds and there would be no competition to it at all. Okay, well, I was clearly wrong about that, but that had merit because it wasn't clash, what I really believed. Let's not fall victim as boxing community, pundits, writers, analysts, presenters, to being dummies. We're not in a political sphere. These guys are not your friends. If they're employing you, then I understand what's happening. But if you're just out there on X, if you're just out there hanging out and talking shit because you like some guy's political party, or you think that these are the A type of alpha guys and you're one of them, or you hate Sean, or you think Radio's a dickhead, whatever. Like, the worst thing we could do as a boxing community is fall into that trap of being a bunch of clannish dopes who are simply saying the thing that supports our buddies and not looking at what's happening in real time with a real commentary that's honest. That's the only camp I'm in. That is what is vastly quickly vanishing from the conversation around boxing. Come on, guys. Take it from somebody who has no friends. Those guys are not your friends. They're literally using you as mouthpieces until they're ready to flip the script. And then they'll be asking you to double back on what you said and look like fools in contradiction to your own commentary.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I remember, being in my teenage years and in my early 20s, trying to always circumvent that who would win, a boxer or an MMA guy in a street fight. And then eventually, as I matured a bit, I would just always be like, oh yeah, an MMA guy, probably tackle the shit out of him and fold him into a pretzel. I just don't like it. I don't watch it. I love boxing. And just move on to the next topic, like not be beholden to thinking the boxers have to be my infallible superheroes. Just like, oh, probably the MMA guy would kick his ass, but that's cool. You can watch that. I choose to stay into boxing for, the rest of my life. And it's funny, just for record keeping, it's like these people, they're defending and going to bat for everything Zuffa does, everything, right? And meanwhile, I think we have kept it a lot more fair. And balanced. We criticized PBC big time the other week after the Errol Spence. I mean, been critical of all of them. PBC, Top Rank, Eddie Hearn. When we had Eddie Hearn on the show, we said, isn't this your fault? Like all this, now you're worried about Zuffa. Didn't you empower Turki Al-Sheikh, who brought it into here? Oscar De La Hoya, been critical of him selling the magazine and then turning around and complaining about Turki Al-Sheikh after taking his money. And then even when it comes to David Benavidez, the first show we did upon Zuffa signing Opetaia was, can they get David Benavidez? And the thumbnail is Dana White with his thumb up with a young, chubby David Benavidez, because we understood all along that Opetaia could be used as a chip to bring in an American star in his prime in David Benavidez. And we've been following David Benavidez's free agency and covering it more than anybody else this year. And it's been going under the radar. Shakur Stevenson has signed a deal, as Devin Haney was playing a leverage game between DAZN and Zuffa. We've been saying all along, Benavidez only has one fight left on his deal. Maybe should even go to Zuffa, because Zuffa may be on its way up, certainly seems that way, and PBC on its way down. And he's only got one prime, one career. And if he wants the big fights, if he wants to not just continue to grab belts, but actually become the undisputed champion of any given division, because it didn't happen at 68, didn't happen at 75 for various reasons, many of them not his own fault. But regardless, that song gets old eventually too. If you at some point, you got to make that accomplishment happen, regardless of circumstance. So now, here all the way up at cruiserweight, if he wants to get the Opetaia fight, and that means aligning with Zuffa instead of staying with Samson, staying with PBC, then that might be what you got to do. That's why that phrase goes, you got to do what you got to do. which is why I'm saying Mauricio's not doing him any favors by taking this belt off Mikaelian and then letting him fight the interim champion for the full title, because like you said, they're both playing a political game. And this could be playing, it's chess, not checkers. This could be playing right into Zuffa's hands. They want you to strip him because they want you to lower your own credibility and show your own hypocrisy on the public stage. And that continues to just build up their guy as the one true champion, regardless of sanctioning body belts, which is what they want the public to eventually realize anyways. And so that,
Sean,
go ahead.
They're talking down to us. WBC is talking down to us. Zuffa punditry and commentary and broadcast commercializing is talking down to us when I hear these commercials talk about a world champion and a world championship is on the line and not mention what sanctioning body is creating that world championship. And while the WBC is stripping a valid champion because that is what they would normally otherwise do. This is a great fight. Opetaia more than deserves to challenge for this world title. If he wasn't at Zuffa, this wouldn't be happening. No question. They wouldn't be thinking about this. And what they're really doing is trying to use with their legislative ability to strip and place the championship elsewhere is to determine who the champion will be. They want that title in their control. I don't think it's in Zuffa's best interest for the WBC to strip the title. The Zuffa's best interest for them to, like they're doing with Ryan Garcia, go along with it. Let the title be on the line. Zuffa put all these commercials and all the ads and the step and repeat posters and don't mention the WBC. And talk about it being a world championship fight, but not what championship it is. Have their little bit of cake and eat it too. And then talk to us like we don't know the difference. Like if they don't mention it, we can't figure it out. Talk to us like dummies. They're both talking to us like dummies. The fact that they are stripping this title, they want Benavidez to be the champion. They don't want Mikaelian to lose that title to Opetaia. Then whether Opetaia represents it or not, he will be the de facto WBC cruiserweight champion in everybody who is fair's mind, and he will have that credibility, and they won't be able to get any sanctioning fees off of that, and there's nothing they can do about that. And the only reason that they're stripping him is because they don't think he can win. Like, Noel, everybody that's involved in this fight is just fighting over your belt because nobody thinks you can win. That's what's happening. The WBC thinks you're going to lose, whether it's Benavidez or Opetaia. The Zuffa executives and promoters think you're going to lose, whether it's Opetaia or Benavidez. And they are jockeying for who gets that belt, who gets that credibility. Nobody's looking out for you in the sense that they think you're going to be WBC champion. If WBC thought that, they'd be happy to let you defend that title and prove that Opetaia is not champion, and you retain that WBC title, and then let you fight Benavidez, and they'd be fine with that because they think the championship is coming home. The reason they let Ryan do it, other than some contractual nuance, really, the real reason they're not giving him any problems, is they think he's going to beat Conor Benn. They like the idea of Ryan Garcia retaining his WBC title on a Zuffa championship fight in a fight against a Zuffa signed fighter. But let it be 2 fights from now if Ryan Garcia is still world champion and signed with Zuffa. Let's see how happy WBC is then to let him defend his WBC title as a Zuffa fighter. I guarantee you all of a sudden there's going to be a huge problem with that. That's what we're doing. That's what we're looking at. Neither side is being honest. And when they talk to us like we don't know that, when we can't figure that out, not only are they calling us idiots, but if we play into that and get clannish about the discussion around that, we're being idiots. And that's the kind of dummies that Paulie Malignaggi is accusing MMA fans and punditry of being. The punditry and the reporters of the MMA are scared to death of losing their access to the UFC fights. They know they can't step out of line with what they say or what they report. They know what the repercussions are going to be. So they are managed effectively. They know they have no recourse and no other game in town. The fans feel defensive about their sport. They feel like, they're a community unto their own, and they want to represent MMA, and they want UFC fighters to be thought of as the baddest MFers on the planet and all that stuff. So whenever you talk about them, it's collective, or at least for a long time it really was. That's clan shit. Let's be realists. Let's carry, if nothing else, that one tradition that's always been in boxing about punditry and the writers and the commentators that we hold in our highest regard, is that we're not dummies, that we talk about the sport and the world as it is, and that the most honest conversation two men can have, and this is a quote from Ernest Hemingway, is a boxing match. Let's maintain that level of intellect when we talk about the sport and what's happening in it.
Yeah, and again, it's part of why it took a little. You're right. It's not really late, but again, I'm in Indianapolis, had to fly a lot and all that. I'm focused on the task at hand. So even for the audience, if I'm stumbling over some of this, it's because I got my mind towards tonight and trying to commentate Robert Merriweather, who is a Zuffa fighter, by the way, still a Zuffa fighter, trying to give him his best. A fighter I've covered since he was at the Floyd Mayweather gym. Spoke highly of his debut on Zuffa, where he won the Fighter of the Night purse and everything, taking a big step back tonight in pay scale and in not fighting on technical network television and everything. So or streaming, the equivalent of network television now. But that is kind of where my mind's at with this too. But to add to the point earlier about how we've been fair and balanced and not just being blind loyalists to any one thing, after I got that gig working with Cameron to do Fundora Thurman, I said that's going to be Thurman's retirement fight. I feel like it is after what Fundora did to him. And I grilled Jermell Charlo right after the fight, who was trying to pop his shit about, I'll still knock Fundora out and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, you haven't fought at this weight in 4 years. And then he was like, you stupid bitch. I fought 3 years ago. And I was like, this weight, Jermell, this weight, 154 pounds. And then I was the one asking about fighting Ennis, the Ennis Zayas winner, and then Virgil in the post-fight. And then on my post-fight commentary said, I don't want to see Fundora go on a PBC fighter retirement tour and fighting Errol Spence. I said, Spence, that was a horrible idea. Now Spence is retired, like I think Keith Thurman will be. And I said, he's got to fight Virgil and the Boots Zayas winner. And then I even asked him at the Avalon last month, don't you want to fight those guys? And isn't it on you ultimately if your promoter, Sampson, keeps navigating and looking for the Charlos and the Spences of the world, and you'll be looked at differently for not fighting the other top fighters in the division? He agreed wholeheartedly and said it'll make us look like punks. And I grilled Mauricio last week on making that fight a mandatory between Virgil Ortiz and Sebastian Fundora, and not continuing to get 3% of two different fighters. Grilled Robert Garcia about it. Everybody involved. Virgil Ortiz's dad but put me on Twitter about Sampson and all this. And I said, look, actually, it's at Mauricio Suleiman who needs to answer for this, why he's not going to do the right thing and mandate the interim champion fight. So been exposing all that for years now. Even back when I was on Fight Hype, I talked about this shit. This is nothing new, but that doesn't suit certain narrative pushers who want to make it seem otherwise. And again, on this channel, have had Tony Hirsch on, have talked about Andreas Cortez and Julian Rodriguez receiving career high paydays, but let them say something good about the promotional outfits they hate and despise. They really never do. And again, they're having this blind allegiance to Zuffa right out the gate, trying to hop on that train. And hey, God bless them. They can go ahead and do that. But just thought I'd clear that up on our end. Yeah.
You've got so many years in the game, so much footage, so many stories broken, so many interviews clocked and published that it's almost a exercise in grand humility that you feel the need to sit there and run down your objectivity and your bona fides as a fair journalist or commentary provider, that your interviews are balanced, and if you do have an issue with something, you're allowed that as well. Like, one thing I'll say about you, Sean, for sure, is if you got an issue, you state it, whether or not it's eloquent or whether or not you've put every single dot on top of the I and crossed every T at every moment. You definitely say the thing that's on your mind and push the envelope where you feel like somebody's got to push the envelope. I've had many, many, many years of being the guy that asks the uncomfortable question, that does the interview, that might get a fighter in trouble or might tweak a promoter's nose and ask the question that nobody's supposed to ask. But the truth is that I enjoy this now because there's really not much room for that anymore. There used to be a real relationship between the promoters and the press, the fighters, the network, the pundits, and the people who are not working for the network, which is a different job. But if you're covering the sport, we used to at least have some kind of mutual respect, and that there was some respect for the profession, that even if you are a tough interviewer, if you're fair, if you're not disrespectful, you're not just trolling, but you got your facts in order, these are legitimate questions, even if they're uncomfortable, the promoter might be annoyed, but you're not getting banned, you're not getting blocked, you're not getting stripped of your credentials, or, you know what I mean, you're not having some collection of other journalists attack you for the promoter. That wasn't a thing. And I have learned from crossing the line, from being super aggressive and having my point that was very unpopular, from saying the wrong thing. Didn't say I did it right every time, but I was in the right sport to do it, because there is no collective authoritarianism in boxing. Because if one promoter bans you, you can go to another promoter, and the fans will come to your back and to your aid and be like, hey, you can't keep this guy out of the fight. We want the voice in there. We want those questions asked. And after they try to wrap your knuckles for a bit, they let you back in, and it's a working relationship. That's going away. The only people now who can really speak freely or analyze anything without some type of inherent bias by who they're trying to stay in league with are people who never attend fights. And that's a damn shame, because the people who have spent their life at ringside, who have relationships with the fighters, who are eyewitnesses to history, should have a voice in that recording of history and in the questioning of those in power at that time in history. And that's what's being really mandated at this point out of the game. And that is the tradition of the UFC's relationship with journalism. And that now has creeped into the relationship with journalists in this boxing space. And the more that mind takes over, the more that attitude becomes prevalent and acceptable, not only to the promoters and to the network executives, but to the fighters and the fans, who are the ones who really benefit from true, steadfast, consistent journalism. Once they accept it, once they don't get to the back of a journalist and questioners who are trying to get at the truth and ask the uncomfortable thing, that hold account, sometimes the promoter, sometimes a network exec, sometimes a fighter themselves or a trainer, speak your mind, be able to discuss things that are uncomfortable but honest. Once that's out the game, all we're doing then is just a cycle of promotion, and everybody's on their own sides with whoever's laying some bread in their pocket, saying what they're told to say. And journalism really is dead. Boxing never dies. It's the oldest tradition in the world, but I'll tell you, it'll be on life support if nobody can cover it honestly. Let's look at actually what we're supposed to be talking about, which is not us, but what's happening, right? What's happening with Jai Opetaia and Noel Mikaelian, and the reason, according to Zuffa, or the pundits who are putting this narrative forward, is that Don King hasn't presented Mikaelian with all of his options. They claim, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what I understand it to be the issue, that he, in Mikaelian, was not presented with the offer from Zuffa for the fight. And so while he was negotiating for his fight with Benavidez, Don King and company were holding from him this offer. So he didn't know that there was another option, there was another deal competing on the table, and that he could fight Opetaia for whatever that deal is. And the reason that can be contested, the reason you can sue Don King for that, the reason that Noel Mikaelian can fight on Zuffa, if that is in fact the truth, is because the Muhammad Ali Act exists. It's because he has recourse to combat that kind of corrupt dealing from his promoter. There's legislation in place to allow him to get out of a deal like that if he's been unfairly railroaded into that deal. And so the irony that Zuffa is in fact using that legislation to get their fight done and to support their fighter, which is Noel Mikaelian, at least for this show, and potentially completely separate him from his promoter and put them at odds on the back of, with the strength of, using the legislation passed with the Muhammad Ali Act as it is currently, is all you need to know about what's best for the fighter and what's best for the sport. You guys want to create some other thing. Like I said on previous shows, I'm not against it. I just don't know why this other thing is necessary. You're killing it. You're making these fights. Start telling the truth. Just say what it is. You've got a world title fight, and it's the WBC world title fight for Ryan Garcia and Conor Benn. They're fighting for the WBC title. That's the only world championship on the line. If you want to give them a trophy, trinket, whatever the other thing is, so be it, man. But don't be talking about it's a world championship fight and then acting like you don't know what world championship it is. Don't be saying that there's only one champion in every division and everybody else is just a belt holder and none of these people are real champions. But yet when Zuffa puts on a championship fight, does that by definition make this person the champion? Or is it just good enough for them to be a belt holder and all of a sudden it's a championship fight? Don't talk to us like we're stupid. WBC, don't talk to us like we're stupid. We know what you're doing. We know why Ryan Garcia was #1 mandatory for Barrios. We're not dumb. We know how Conor Benn got in this position. We're not stupid. Like, it's just an insult. And if you really care about what is best for the sport, fighters included, and you think this WBO is necessary, then how about we strengthen the Ali Act? How about the very legislation that Zuffa is using to make sure that Mikaelian gets a fair shake, gets the best fight possible, gets the fight that he wants, or because he wasn't presented with both fight options, the very legislation they're using to get him out of that first contract and potentially win a lawsuit with Don King. Let's make sure that every fighter after him, whether they be in a UBO or not, have the opportunity to use that kind of legislation, to have that leverage, to have that recourse if they get done dirty. Because the dirty truth is, if Mikaelian was in a UBO and that happened, he would have no recourse. That wouldn't be possible. This very thing that they're using would be ineffective because it wouldn't apply to him. How can you use it and then want to take it away from every fighter after him the second you can, and then claim that he got done dirty? But yet you want to set up a landscape for yourselves only. What if Don King had a UBO? Would you still be supporting that? No, you'd be trying to get him out of this fight on the same grounds. So guys, let's cut the shit and talk to the fans and the pundits like we're not dummies. And if doing what's best for the sport is what's really in your bet and really you think is in the best interest of the fighter and what you're about, not just having a monopoly and doing what you're doing now until you can do something different later, strengthen the Ali Act. I want to hear from the people who are calling this activism and are, campaigning against this conversation with what you think would make the Ali Act, which I do believe has a lot of ineffective elements to it. No oversight. It's very difficult, actually, if you don't have the money for the lawyers and you don't want to sit out with your promoter and not get fights, to utilize it. Let's put some teeth in it. Let's find some oversight committee that is supposed to police it. Let's find some money so that if a fighter needs to utilize it, it's not coming out of his pocket and he doesn't have to sit out in the interim. Let's make it better. Let's revive it and make it better for real instead of trying to sidestep it and still use it in the process.
Yeah, well, the irony, too, is of the revisions being put forth to the Senate is that now they're allowing the sanctioning bodies to continue to do all the fucked up shit they've done and have interim titles and all this stuff because that's like we want to have our cake and eat it too clause. And just actually, after getting our feet wet in this boxing thing, like we're doing with Ryan and Conor Benn, we want a clause that says, well, if we feel like using their belt, we can use their belt. And that's funny because that was one thing. Well, you all got to get on board with the restrictions to the sanctioning bodies. Everybody can agree with that at least, right? Okay, you may not like the UBO, you may not like the financial backing of it or this or that, but everybody's got to be along with the restrictions to the sanctioning bodies, and they've actually thrown that out the window and have allowed that in the revision. So it's really not even. It makes it sillier pigeonholing this whole sanctioning body versus Zuffa thing when they're putting in clauses to do business with each other when it behooves both of them. And like you said with Kellerman, I know you're basically getting at like a Max Kellerman saying these are trinkets, they don't really matter. The only belt that matters is ring, unless it's McKenna versus Olia, and now it's a world championship fight. It's not just a trinket fight. It's not just. And for a lot of these people that are dogpiling on Max Kellerman, the great Max Kellerman, and I do mean that. Who still calls a great fight whenever he wants to. Yeah, he does the oversell, and he's doing that too much right now, whatever. But they all do it. DAZN does it. When fights would be on Prime, they'll do it too. And part of why that relationship you were talking about earlier with media was understood by the promoters and the networks is you had people spearheading it like HBO with Larry Merchant, who kind of set the tone at the top of the pyramid that we're going to keep it real. We're going to be honest here. And you want to talk Hemingway, Larry Merchant was like a poet, to just say he was a boxing analyst or a commentator would actually be selling him short. He was like a poet with his critiques and also giving beautiful praise too when it was necessary. But that's another video I want to make for another day about the great Larry Merchant. But yeah, it's Max Kellerman is the fruit bore by this company that you're shilling for at every stop. He is their mouthpiece. So you can't, you can't like love the tree and then just hate the fruit that it's bearing. He is he is put in that position by Zuffa to do exactly that. So yeah, there's the hypocrisy of all that. And I do want to say the reason why I kept saying Mauricio's not doing a favor to Benavidez is, let's say it further drives the way. And the reason why they would want Opetaia to maybe not fight for the sanctioning body belts and they're okay with Ryan Garcia doing it. Well, there's a few things there, Raheem. They don't have Ryan yet. Ryan has this fight and next fight with Golden Boy and DAZN. So they got to play nice for now. And Jai Opetaia, they have exclusively. They got him. And he is already, from what the fallout that happened again with the IBF, he is already the poster boy for the victimized by the sanctioning bodies fighter that they can use to weaponize and have weaponized and has their media supporters have weaponized against the sanctioning bodies. And the IBF, we talked about it months ago, may have walked into that trap. You got to know ahead of time that they're poking and provoking you to get a certain reaction, and you may have given them the reaction they wanted, which was to strip Opetaia. And the WBC, by stripping Mikaelian, it's that all over again. And it allows them to further discredit you. And the WBC deserves it more so than the IBF. The IBF actually had a case. And the IBF, out of all the sanctioning bodies, holds true to their rules more than the other three do, although they've been investigated by the FBI too in the earlier part of this century and all that. But they actually had a case. Well, you are promoting a world title that isn't legal by legislation yet, and we can only allow unifications with sanctioning bodies that are actually sanctioned, with world titles that are sanctioned. So the IBF has a more, clear case, even though, again, I think Opetaia was wrongly stripped. But the WBC, by maneuvering all their rules and finding loopholes and having no prior precedent that's been held up to with Benavidez, they are walking into that trap more, and I think that could work to Zuffa's benefit. This is why the sanctioning bodies are full of shit, And Opetaia could be the poster boy for the Zuffa belt he's already won. See, the Zuffa champion in this case is the true champion. And that means if Benavidez ever wants, that wedge has been driven down further and deeper. And so if Benavidez ever wants what's eluded him to be the true champion of a division, you create this deeper political divide that he may have to cross the street, like Terrence Crawford had to cross the street to get the Errol Spence fight that he was long and undeservedly denied of. And Benavidez, like Terrence Crawford by some people with in the media, independent media, whatever you want to call it, they were saying, look, Crawford's ducking Spence. He knows the political rules here. He knows that the unified champion, the bigger star at the time, Errol Spence, he's aligned with PBC. He knows that the PBC has Sean Porter and Keith Thurman and Danny Garcia and Errol Spence, and he chose to stay with Top Rank anyways. So he's ducking Errol Spence and all that nonsense. That same game could be played with the shoe on the other foot this time, which is Benavidez knows that the legitimate cruiserweight champion is Jai Opetaia. He knows that PBC doesn't have any of the other champions at light heavyweight or cruiserweight, and he chose to stay with him anymore. He's ducking Jai Opetaia. So the way Mauricio actually could do him a favor is not by giving him a trinket, is not by stripping Mikaelian and giving him a green belt. It would be let Mikaelian keep the belt. Opetaia is going to beat him. Let Benavidez become the interim champion. And if he so chooses to want to stay with his current outfit, like Crawford chose then, he has a means to actually land that fight if it's mandated that he is the interim champion, can fight the full champion for what would really be undisputed. But now, by taking Mikaelian's belt off the table and there being no belts on the table, it strengthens the Zuffa champion as being the true champion because Jai Opetaia is the #1 cruiserweight. And now he may be in a you got to cross the street situation, even though he's actually the bigger star than Opetaia. So,
yeah, you know how we could solve all this? Everybody stop bullshitting. Say what it is. Let champions fight for their titles and defend their titles. The sanctioning bodies adhere to their rules. Zuffa acknowledge the champions that are fighting on their platform. We don't need this. This part, this division, all of that explanation that was needed around who's champion, who's going to be champion, who gets an opportunity to be undisputed, it was convoluted enough. We just got all these promoters on one network, which I don't think is a bad thing just because it allows for the promoters to work together and then there aren't so many different silo pods of people trying to maneuver their champions away from challenges that would leave the championship outside of their reach. But if all the promoters are on the same network and are working together, then theoretically, if your fighter loses the championship, you have a much better chance of getting him another crack at it, or a different fighter in that weight division of your stable a shot at the title because the network is interested in continuing world-class championship, good level fights, and everybody's working together for the betterment of the sport, for this thing to actually be transparent, understandable in one breath, not 50 minutes of talk. And everybody can just admit that, yes, I've got to give a little to get a little. Some of this works in my best interest and some of it doesn't. But if all of it works together, this rising tide does lift all boats, that the sport of boxing will have more credibility, that the champions will be acknowledged for their championships, and that the undisputed champion who is able to collect all the belts in a transparent process will then be deemed the champion of champions, which doesn't mean that while he's going around collecting those belts, that those other champions are just belt holders. Yes, they are champions too, but they are not the undisputed champion, and that's why that's such hallowed ground. That's why that's such a great accomplishment to ascend to. That's how you get an accolade that is above the other champions. I like that process. But at this point, we can only have that process, and boxing can only reach its highest heights of credibility, entertainment, with transparency and honesty from us, from the promoters, from the fighters, from the sanctioning bodies, and their managers, and everybody in between. Let's get on the same page. Let's just do that and leave all this politics and all your billionaire masters and political sphere of influence and pocket lacers out of the equation. If we do that, then the whole sport wins. What's happening right now is we are losing with arguing about this nonsense, and nobody's being honest about what it is.
Yeah, and again, just with the Kellerman thing, it's you can't just make him the whipping boy and then not have any criticism at all for the mouthpiece he is serving. You can't. Well, we love Zuffa, we love everything TKO and Zuffa, but Kellerman this, Kellerman that. It's like he is just doing their bidding. So there's a contradiction there. But lastly, there's still this talk like Opetaia is lineal and in so many words undisputed, when even Opetaia says he knows he's not undisputed. That's what he's fighting for. He wants to be undisputed. That's why he's upset about what keeps happening with the sanctioning bodies, understandably. In order for Opetaia is the number one cruiserweight. I'll grant you that, no doubt about it. Benavidez is number 2. They're clearly 1 and 2. But Opetaia has not yet reached the David Haye, Alexander Usyk, Evander Holyfield ranks of the cruiserweight division. All those guys were undisputed. I mean, Haye may have had 3 out of 4, but he was, 3 out of 4 is more than 1 out of 4. And he was, by all intents and purposes, he was undisputed. In order for there to really be a true champion of cruiserweight, they have to fight each other. Benavidez, in the aftermath of Alexander Usyk moving up, was the number 1 guy because he gave the undisputed champion his toughest fight at cruiserweight. Did Benavidez. Benavidez was getting well into his 30s by the time he fought Jai Opetaia. Benavidez won a WBO belt. It got stripped or vacated. Then he won the IBF belt. He never held 2 belts at the same time, let alone 3, let alone all 4. So in my mind, Opetaia I think his lineal status is debatable. I don't think his status as the number 1 cruiserweight is debatable. There's dispute is what I'm getting at. The title is disputed. In order for there to be an undisputed, Benavidez and Opetaia have to square off at some point. And hopefully
there is dispute as long as there is another champion. This idea that somebody is the champion of champions without beating the other champions is absolute nonsense. In the UK, we call that waffle. It's drivel. It is bullshit. You have to beat the other guys. And in fact, Noel Mikaelian is a champion. And until somebody beats him, he's disputing the other champions as being champion. And until one guy beats everybody with the belt, then he's not the champion of champions. That's a fucking fact. And anybody who has the temerity to say that they unilaterally can decide who the real champion is because of who they think will beat everybody else is a mouthpiece for some agenda at best or being woefully dishonest at worst. That is not how boxing works. That's not how any sport works. You got to win the game. You got to win the fight. You got to win the match. And not until you've won do you become the champion.
Well, I mean, there is gray area. You don't necessarily, to be the man, the champion, the one true champion of a division, you don't necessarily have to win every sanctioning body belt every time.
If you're going to be undisputed, you do. And you can't say that you are. If there's other belt holders than other sanctioning bodies that you haven't beaten, then you can think you're the best. People can even say you're the best, but they can't say you're the only real champion in the division. And becoming undisputed is hard. There is politics to it. There is timing. It's difficult. I mean, you can see from Usyk how difficult it is to hold on to once you attain it. But that's what makes it such hollowed ground. That's what makes it so difficult. And we're not in a sport where there's no such thing as an upset. How many upsets have we seen in the annals of history? Yeah, nobody, and I'm sorry, Mikaelian, but nobody really thinks you can win except for you, probably, and your coach. But nobody in this equation is banking on you winning. But you can. You're in the fight. And if you do win it, then what does that mean? That means that you then become, in my mind, would be unified champion. If the IBF had allowed Opetaia to retain his champion, he would still be WBC champion, and everybody's plans would be kind of turned upside down. That's an opportunity that he's earned. And until somebody takes that belt off him in the ring or because he has done something to lose his right to that title, then he's champion. And until somebody beats everybody that's in those championship positions, nobody's undisputed. And nobody can say that that guy is the only champion.